Mackular show. I am Count Mackular. In this episode, I want to pay tribute to the hard rock slash heavy metal slash groove metal band of the 90s. To me, the greatest hard rock metal band to come out in the 90s, Pantera. A lot of people will argue that Metallica was the best to come out in the 90s. And as far as popularity and record sales, I would have to agree Metallica is probably the biggest hard rock band to come out in the 90s. But well, Metallica has been out since the 80s, but they reached the peak of popularity in the 90s. But I would say it's Pantera, bar none, of the most edgy and the most hardcore band, with keeping the musicianship there. They balanced their hardcore edginess with solid musicianship, and this is why I want to pay tribute to them. They released all solid albums pretty much through the 90s, and they're my favorite of all time as far as any, with exception to the last one, which I'll get into. The first three Pantera albums are the most solid albums as far as the hard rock genre. Like I said, many may argue that it's Metallica, but I think that the consistency in every album, at least the first few albums, the first three albums of Pantera, far exceeded Metallica. So first we have Cowboys from Hell. Just to give you a little backstory, Pantera was a band before this album, but Phil Anselmo, the lead singer, wasn't the lead singer. It was still known as Pantera, but this is their first studio album. So depends on what, if you're a major Pantera fan, you know the history. They were a band before this album, but this is what people know as their first album, because this is one of the first. They were on Elektra Records, Atco Records, and this is their first studio major release with Phil Anselmo as the lead singer. This album, Cowboys from Hell, is a classic. If you like hard rock, heavy metal, it's a must-have. You got Cowboys from Hell, Primal Concrete Sledge, Cemetery Gates, a song called The Sleep. This album is a great album. It's a classic in the Pantera universe. It's a must-have. Once again, what made this band so good as far as hardcore music is, in my opinion, you have bands like Slayer, Megadeth, and I love those bands, and they would make really good music, but you didn't get that cohesiveness in the album like Pantera album. You can listen to this album from the first track to the last track, and there's 12 tracks on this album, and you can listen to it straight through, and it keeps the consistency and keeps the edge and the fury straight through the album. Of course, you have Dimebag Darrell, who's probably one of the greatest guitarists that come out in that era of the 90s. Definitely, he was the greatest guitarist to come out in the 90s. He had a signature squeal to his guitar, and it's in death he'll get his props as the legend of all time. I mean, in life he was respected, but I think he's more respected in death. He passed away a few years ago by some crazed fan. The second album is Vulgar Display of Power. I would say this is my favorite of all Pantera albums. This is the album where I discovered them. In New York, they had an AM station called Z-Rock, 1480 Z-Rock. It was on AM when people actually listened to the radio, and I heard Walk, the most popular track on this, the most legendary track on this album, and I was like, okay, who's this? So once I heard that song, the first time I heard it, I was like, okay, this band is pretty hardcore, because it didn't sound like the regular Megadeth, Metallica, where it's just shredding straight through the song. It had like a groove to it. It kind of had little break beats in it, so it was just so unique. So it's almost been 20 years since I bought this album. Count Mackular is 99 years old, so 20 years, you know. I was a young Count back then, but almost 20 years ago this album came out, and I could still listen to any Pantera album and still get the same kick out of it. And Walk is definitely probably my favorite song they'll ever. I can listen to Walk any time of the day. It has a uniqueness about it that no other hard rock band ever got to capture. Like I said, it takes a metal with a groove to it, and it's just a different tempo and a different kind of off the beaten path type of song. But you have like Mouth for War and By Demons Be Driven and This Love. So this is my favorite album, Vulgar Display of Power. Also, the video to Walk, if you want to watch it on YouTube, is actually one of my favorites. So Walk actually has a video. That's W-A-L-K, Walk, from Pantera. That video captures the a show really well, because I went to see Pantera in '97 at Roseland Ballroom in New York, and it pretty much captures that same vibe to it. So Vulgar Display of Power is my favorite of all, and once again, you can listen to this album from first track to last, and it'll be, you don't have to skip tracks. It just holds up straight through the album. Now the third Pantera album is Far Beyond Driven. Now this is a close second. This was my favorite for a while, then it went back to Vulgar Display of Power, but this is right up there. It's almost a tie with Vulgar Display of Power. This one, they kicked it up another notch. To do a little history, this album went #1 on the Billboard chart, so it was a big deal for a hard rock heavy metal band to actually reach #1 on the charts back in '94, and I remember I got it the first week it came out. And once again, it's straight through from top to bottom. What made me like Vulgar Display just a little bit more, because it had a more groove, and Vulgar Display of Power had a more groove to it, and this one is much more straight through hardcore, just like it says, Far Beyond Driven. It's more driven straight through. But the best track on here is 5 Minutes Alone, which, like I said, almost over 15 years ago this album came out, and I can still listen to 5 Minutes Alone, and it still has that off the beaten path type of different, not your temporary heavy metal song. It just has this sort of a groove to it and sort of little quirky things about it. But straight through, Far Beyond Driven is a great album. This is the album where they peaked in popularity, they peaked in their sound and their stage performance. So once again, this is a great album. In '96 they released The Great Southern Trendkill. Being that by that point, by the time this album came out, I was already a big Pantera fan. So when I heard this album was coming out in '96, I was really psyched about it. But when I first heard it, I didn't like it. This one had to grow on me, because it lost a lot of the groove sound out of it. But after a while, I started to like it. I didn't immediately like it like I did the first 3 albums. But it was just a little, I think they overdid it a little bit with the trying to top Far Beyond Driven, when just going so fast that it lost the groove sound. But the first track, The Great Southern Trendkill, is very good. This song called Floods on here takes the electric sound out of it. It's more of an acoustic song, which was always my favorite song off this album. Once again, it's a great Pantera album, and it took a while. It took maybe a few months to grow on me, aside from the first 3 albums where I liked them immediately. But they were evolving as a band. Like at this point, they have reached stardom already. So it's like these bands come to this point where they figure out let's just keep moving, get faster and stronger. But sometimes you don't have to do that. You should just never tinker with a formula. But it's still a great album. The Great Southern Trendkill is still a great album, and there are some good tracks on it. But the first 3 are the most legendary of all time. It's hard to top the first 3.